Well, in a political world often slammed for being out of touch with regular Americans, nobody knows that better than myself, being from Los Angeles and seeing how Governor Gavin Newsom failed his people even recently with the fires. We've been looking for people like Congressman Brandon Gill, who burst onto the scene when he filed to run for Congress in Texas' 26th district on November 20th of 2023. Taking over from retiring Representative Michael C. Burgess, Gill pitched himself as a conservative pit bull ready to fight for real America. Not the DC swamp insiders that we've all begun to hate so much as we see the Doge administration go in immediately cutting down the bureaucracy. Now, you might recognize him from launching the pro-Trump DC Inquirer or for teaming up with his father-in-law, Dinesh D'Souza, who's a friend of the show, been on here many times, on the divisive 2,000 Mules flick that lit up the right-wing blogosphere. Now, just 2 months into his congressional gig, sworn in on January of 2025, he's already making noise and waves with bills like the Remain in Mexico Act to overhaul immigration. We're sitting down with him now at thegatewaypundit.com to unpack his whirlwind start as well as discuss his opinions on the recent delivery of the little short man who didn't come in a suit. That's Vladimir Zelensky, as well as his opinions on something even more controversial, mass legal migration, which very few in Congress are speaking about. Congressman Brandon Gill, welcome to the Gateway Pundit. We're so happy to have you here.
Elijah, thanks for having me.
Incredible. So let's just jump first into the topic of Zelensky. Obviously, last week, Zelensky got into it with Trump and Vance at the White House. People were saying he was disrespectful, that he was talking over them, got kicked out real quickly. And then we saw the European countries in unison with some sort of like drone NPC style response show their support. I want to get your opinion on this, from a congressional level. What was your personal opinion on how the Zelensky interaction went? And was Trump in the right, or do you align more with the European leaders saying we've actually got to double down in our support for Zelensky despite how he treats us as international leaders?
Well, first of all, thanks again for having me on. I think it's worth putting this meeting into context. Zelensky has been in a war with Russia for years now. It's a war that he cannot win, where there is no end to the bloodshed in sight, where his own people are being slaughtered by the hundreds of thousands. Every single day, more Ukrainians are dying. And the only reason that the war has lasted as long as it has is that the United States has been providing arms and munitions and weapons and support for Ukraine. So whenever he walks into the Oval Office, he doesn't have the cards, as President Trump pointed out. This was him asking for more money. And in fact, this whole meeting was a mineral rights deal that had already been signed, which would have tied the United States more closely to Ukraine, which then, of course, binds us to them. We have a clear direct interest, an economic interest in Ukraine. So this was all set up for his own benefit. And the thing about it was, all he had to do was go into the White House and basically say thank you to President Trump and to Vice President Vance. Now, what he actually did was the exact opposite of that. He went into their office and decided he was going to lecture President Trump and the American people about our involvement in the war and where it goes from here. It was frankly disgusting, and it was so unbelievably ungracious to the American people who have given his people hundreds of billions of dollars. All he had to do was be respectful, but he blew up that meeting. Now, I don't think that we should have gotten involved in the Ukraine war to begin with. But what I really don't like seeing is a third-rate country like Ukraine coming onto our soil and treating our president and our vice president like they are employees of his, like they are supposed to do his bidding. And I'm so thankful that that kind of attitude does not go unchecked anymore. I think had that happened 4 or 5 months ago, whenever President Biden was in the White House, he probably would have let it slide. But we're not putting up with this kind of nonsense anymore. This is America first. This is a return to realism and a return to a rational foreign policy. So I think President Trump and Vice President Vance handled that perfectly. And I'm so thrilled and so proud that they are the leaders of this country.
So, that's your personal opinion, but I mean, how does the rest of Congress sort of feel reflectively, considering the fact on the outside, we're not there on the floor. So we're not hearing what's going on, but it seems like there is bipartisan support for Ukraine, at least previously. However, when we saw Lindsey Graham flip on Zelensky, a previous ally, have things changed? Is there some sort of a growing animosity towards the lack of thankfulness from Zelensky and his regime? Like, what's actually the sentiment that you're hearing on the House floor?
Well, the Republican Party has been split for the past couple of years on Ukraine aid and the extent of our foreign involvement more broadly and what our foreign policy should look like. But I think that the meeting was really a turning point. I think that whenever a foreign leader comes into the United States and treats us as poorly as he did, I think that there's sort of an awakening and a realization that maybe we don't need to be involved in every corner of the globe. Maybe we're not actually promoting democracy by keeping this man in power, who, by the way, hasn't had an election in quite some time, if you remember. So I do think that this was a bit of a turning point in our relationship with Ukraine. But I think we're also at a point, secondly, that there really is not an end to this war without a brokered peace from the United States. And there's a growing realization that our foreign policy should reflect a rational understanding of the world as it is and not as we want it to be. And certainly not as some left-wing woke bureaucrat in the administrative state wants it to be. I wish that Russia didn't invade Ukraine. I think most of my colleagues agree with that. But the reality is that they did. And the two have been at war. And there have been hundreds of thousands of people that have been killed. And the only way this can end favorably for the United States, I believe, is a brokered path to peace. Think of where we're at right now. There are really only a few options. One is that the war continues, the slaughtering, the bloodshed continues because America continues arming Ukraine. And what does that do? That risks us getting into a massive global, possibly nuclear conflagration with the other major nuclear superpower in the world, which is Russia. Two, Ukraine could they could withdraw from the war. They could, sue for peace here with Russia, most likely on incredibly unfavorable terms. They could basically surrender. Or three, there could be a negotiated path to peace brokered by the United States as the global leader, the world hegemon. That last third option is the one that is going to be, I believe, most favorable to the United States, to our interests globally, and frankly, most favorable to Ukraine. But I think that realization, that realism was really driven home by that meeting. But I think that there's people have come a long way, I should say, to summarize over the past 2 years on the Ukraine conflict.
What a shame that's happening with Zelensky. But before we jump into the next part of our interview, guys, we are witnessing a generational decline in men's testosterone levels due to lifestyle choices, diet, and exposure to environmental toxins. This decline can result in persistent fatigue, diminished strength, reduced libido, mood swings, and overall loss of vitality, which might be keeping you from feeling your best self. Are you feeling that fatigue? Are you over the age of 25? Well, listen to me right now. There is an opportunity that you only have once in a lifetime to take control of your vitality with Man's Edge from Neutronics Labs, and I've got it right here. This is the natural solution to support healthy testosterone levels. Now, Man's Edge is more than just a standard booster. It combines powerful ingredients like fenugreek, which I love, IGF-1 and NO2, plus more to help you feel your best. Now, studies show that fenugreek increases testosterone levels by up to 46%. Plus, unlike traditional powders and pills, Man's Edge offers up to 98% absorption. That's what makes this very important. There's basically only two ways that you can actually take testosterone boosters. It's direct injections, which are scary a little bit with needles, or you can do a sublingual solution like this under your tongue. If you try to swallow it in pills, I'm going to tell you your body's going to destroy most of it. Now, this ensures you receive the full benefits of these clinically proven ingredients. Even Frank Stallone has made it a part of his daily routine to stay on top of his game. Join Frank Stallone and thousands of men rediscovering their vitality daily with Man's Edge. Sign up for our auto ship program today and save 50% on all your orders. Reclaim your lost youth and energy. Visit the link below now or go to tboostnow.com. Use code Elijah, E-L-I-J-A-H at tboostnow.com to save an additional 10% on your first order. Check it out today. Let's jump back into the interview. So to add to that, obviously we saw somewhat of a uniform response from European leaders, particularly not just from the European Union, right? Keir Starmer in the United Kingdom also came out and gave unanimous support, claiming that he would, supply boots on the ground, possibly even air support from British nationals to broker a peace deal in Ukraine. From your perspective in Congress, is this a good thing for the American people? Is what Trump did by ticking off the European Union, does that benefit us in the fact that maybe they'll provide more financial and military support for Ukraine, and therefore it will take some of the weight off the American taxpayer? Or is that a divide that's coming between the United States and its European allies, where they're sort of breaking away from Trump, saying, you know what, look, if you want to take that stance, fine, but we're going to take the opposite stance. Where are we at with our foreign relation there?
Well, I think that what's best is to promote America's interests on the world stage and not be beholden to international bodies or to foreign countries, including our allies in Europe. Because just because the UN dictates something or makes some harshly worded statement about the war in Ukraine doesn't mean that the United States must, by necessity, follow through and agree with them. Just because Europe has a specific interest in this war doesn't mean that we have to send people or guns or ammunition or our wealth to that war. I think that we need to recognize that our involvement with these countries cannot be one-sided. And I think that that's what President Trump is trying to convey here, which is that we have to have a foreign policy rooted in promoting our interests first and foremost. And, it's great to have a good relationship with Europe. We would love that. But if Europe wants to prolong this war, I'm highly skeptical that we ought to be as involved with them and as involved with many international bodies that they're associated with.
So my last question on this topic is in regard to former Fox News host and current podcaster Tucker Carlson, who explained, he's obviously taken a less supportive view of Ukraine and echoes the thoughts of a lot of Americans, not that they're pro-Putin or pro-Russia, but just realizing that, this picture-perfect idea that Ukraine is some country we need to support, that they are not corrupt, is a complete farce and total lie, that they've actually sold our weapons on the black market. They've been involved in assassination attempts and actual assassinations of political enemies, some even of our own allies, including journalists, which of course is very shocking to someone like myself, understanding the threat there. This might be a point-blank question, but at the way that Zelensky's behaving and at the rate that we're going, do you see our partnership with Ukraine increasing and us being able to broker that peace deal? Or do you, believe some of what Tucker's saying, that, Ukraine has kind of been acting like an enemy state for some time, and maybe it's time that we start treating them a little bit like the way they treat us and play hardball?
Well, first of all, one of the points that you made is particularly insightful, I think, which is that prior to this war, there was a widespread bipartisan recognition that Ukraine was one of the most corrupt countries on the entire globe. The New York Times wrote about it. Liberal media would write about it. It's run by corrupt foreign, USSR oligarchs. Everybody agreed there. And then all of the sudden, whenever the war starts, Ukraine is some bastion for democracy. So we have to have a realistic idea of what foreign policy should look like in light of that. And again, I think that we've got to go back to what is best for the United States, not what is best for Ukraine or for Russia or for any other country that is not us. And I think that what's best for us is a path to peace. It's to stop the killing and stopping the mass murder, the mass slaughter of people on both sides of this war. And we should be thankful that we have a president who actually supports peace instead of prolonging a conflict that, again, could erupt into a massive worldwide global conflagration that could be actually World War III. That is not hyperbole here. And whenever we're talking about nuclear weapons, which are certainly a part of the equation whenever we're dealing with Russia, we have to be extraordinarily careful. So I do think that a path to peace is, most in favor of the United States' interests. And I think that that's the framework that we should be using whenever evaluating what is the next course of action here. And that's regardless of what we think about Russia or what we think about the Ukraine or Zelensky or Putin or anybody else.
Congressman, a quick question, a shift of topic here. I thought it was really interesting since you are, a freshman congressman and you are coming from not just a representation of a new person, but also of a new generation, sort of a change of the guard, as some might put it. There was a viral post that came out from a user named Dylan522P, also known as Dylan Patel, that was said, "My caste." It gave the name Leuva Patidar Samaj. Sorry to my Indian viewers. I'm sure I butchered that. Volleyball tournament in Dallas is unreal. 8,000 people here out of 40,000 people in the U.S. Everyone from part of the Gujarat and same way of life in the U.S. Literally everyone here owns a motel or gas station in rural America. Talking about bringing people together based upon a foreign caste system. This is obviously very foreign to the United States and brings up the issue, as many people noticed, with the lack of assimilation that has happened in our country with this mass unchecked legal immigration, which is a very, very controversial hot topic. And I got to admit, I was shocked to see you respond to it. You posted in response, "America is the land of opportunity precisely because we don't have a caste system. We cannot sustain America's prosperity and liberty by importing foreign class allegiances. Immigration without assimilation is national and cultural suicide." This is a very, not controversial to me, but to the Uniparty. This is something that people just don't talk about anymore. And I'd love to hear your opinion on this. I think you're one of the first congressmen I've heard bring up the dangers of the levels of immigration that we're having, where we're not promoting American identity. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you meant by this and what your opinion is on our current level of immigration and this lack of push for homogeneity in our homeland or any sort of American identity?
Yeah, and first of all, let me say that the biggest crisis in the United States is illegal immigration. Of course, we've had well over 10 million illegal aliens pour across our border just during the Biden administration
Wow.
alone. And frankly, that number is probably north of 15 million once we take into account the known gotaways and other people who we haven't been able to account for at all. And that's got to be our top priority, is securing the border and making sure that we can codify President Trump's executive orders into law to ensure that we don't have another crisis like what we had under Joe Biden. But to your point on the legal immigration question, what I wrote in response to that tweet was controversial in Washington, but it's not controversial anywhere else. There have been poll after poll after poll after poll for years who have shown that the American people would like less legal immigration. And oftentimes what happens is the American people don't even know how many people are coming into this country legally. Did you know that the number one bucket of legal immigration into the United States is through chain migration? That's between 250 and 300,000 people every single year. Chain migration is whenever somebody comes into the United States and then they bring their spouse, which I think most Americans are okay with. But then them and their spouse bring each one of their parents, and then their parents bring their siblings, and then those siblings bring their kids, who then get married and then bring more people. And it goes on and on with no end in sight. And that is entirely legal right now. I think that is a disgrace and not only a legal loophole, but an abuse of our immigration system. So what I was referring to in this tweet was one of the problems associated with that, which is mass legal immigration into the country that doesn't assimilate. And there were two problems with that tweet. One of them, which you laid out, which is bringing in foreign class allegiances, which is completely antithetical to any American idea of legal immigration throughout our history. Whenever you come into this country, we have a phrase that's often used as America is a big melting pot. And I think that that's a horrible and anachronistic and poor way to look at what legal immigration into America is. Legal immigration means you leave your foreign allegiances behind. That includes your allegiance to your past country, to your class system, in this case, the Indian caste system, and you become grafted onto the American vine. You're not a hyphenated American. You are 100% American. That's not what's happening here. The second thing that post, which really hammered home and said explicitly, is that a lot of these people are coming to the United States and living in ethnic groups based on the foreign caste system, and they're operating the exact same way they were in their home country. In other words, they are purposefully not assimilating into America. A country cannot survive whenever they allow large numbers of people from other countries to come in and bring those allegiances, bring those ethnic conflicts into the United States and not become fully American. Not only does that dilute our country, but it totally disregards and disrespects our heritage and the people who are already here to begin with. And I think that this is a key part of the America First agenda, which is a recognition that we have to put our own people before foreigners. This has nothing to do with hating foreigners or hating foreign cultures or countries or anything else. It's about loving Americans and the American people who are having their wages diluted because we've brought in massive numbers of foreigners, or the number of people who are seeing their social services, which they at some point rely on, whether that's police officers, firefighters, hospitals, schools, other social services, which are struggling to keep up with this deluge of people coming into the country. You know, this is a great example of putting other countries and other people before American citizens, and it's got to end. Right now, according to the Center for Immigration Studies, about 16% of the United States is foreign born. And according to them, that's the highest we've ever had recorded, ever. You think of the mass waves of legal immigration coming through Ellis Island during the Gilded Age, the early 20th century. This is greater than even then. That's a problem. That's a problem for the continuation of our culture, our way of life, our heritage, for the sustenance of our government. So many of our cultural institutions, and by extension our governmental institutions, rest on a certain degree of cultural trust and a certain level of cultural understanding that we are all Americans, and you can't do that with massive waves of legal immigration.
So, as to close here, I have to ask. You know, you're a politician. You are at least a new politician, so you're good with words, and I like what you have to say. But what is the solution here? And do you believe that that solution could actually be enacted within yours and my lifetime? Or do you think that we're going to have serious hurdles when it comes to protecting our people from this invasion, both what I would say is illegal and legal, that is hurting the very core of our country, our identity, and the livelihood, the quality of life of the people that you and I love?
Well, first of all, let me say and to point out that, you know, my wife is half Indian, so this has nothing to do with any kind of racial or ethnic animus. This is having to do with loving this country, but there's been a massive paradigm shift over the past 10 years with regards to immigration. If you remember, whenever President Trump first entered the political scene in 2015, and he recognized that we have seen massive amounts of illegal aliens coming into the country, then under the the Obama administration. And President Trump started a phrase and a chant that you'd hear at rallies all the time. He'd say, "Build a wall." And the response from the left, and even some in our own party, many in our own party, unfortunately, was to respond with kind of useless, empty aphorisms that have no basis in American history, which was things like, you know, America doesn't build walls, we build bridges, or, you know, we're a country of immigrants, or things like that. And many of them called President Trump racist. And we've seen how far we've come since then. We had largely a secure border under the first Trump administration. And then Biden opened up the floodgates. Again, we talked earlier, over 10 million illegal aliens, probably over 15, came into the country. And you've had I think, an awakening and a recognition that this is a serious, serious problem, that our country can't survive this. And, you know, the great economist Milton Friedman once wrote that you can't have, and I'm paraphrasing here, you can't have both a welfare state and open borders. I don't think we should have either, but you certainly cannot have both. And that's what we tried to do under the Biden administration. So I think that now you cannot be a Republican and get elected and be against building a border wall. It is the most common sense solution to stopping the tide of illegal immigration. But then we have to go a little bit further, and I think we have to ask, how else are people coming into our country? And one of the ways is an abuse of our asylum laws. You have people coming to the country who are economic refugees. They're just looking for job opportunities, and that's fine. But our asylum laws, our refugee program, is about people who are being politically persecuted or persecuted on behalf of their race or ethnicity or religion or some other characteristic. It's not to make America a marketplace and allow anybody from anywhere on the globe to come into our country. So I'm saying all that to say that I think that we're at a point now where there is widespread recognition that we've got to reform even our legal immigration system, because that's been a big part of the problem here, which is that we've had people abusing our asylum laws. And once we get there, I think that there is also broad recognition that we've got to reform the way in which we admit people and the criteria we use to allow people to come into our country. Right now, large parts of our immigration system are, I talked about chain migration, but there's also a diversity lottery. Many of the visa programs are based on a random lottery system. We're not selecting the people who we think best fit in American society and will adhere to our culture. We're doing it randomly. It is so nonsensical and anti-American and is harmful to our country so transparently that I think that increasingly there's more and more political will to do something about it. And that's something I hope to lead on. Now, I've got a bill right now, which is the Remain in Mexico Act, about as common sense as you can have. And all it does is codify President Trump's Remain in Mexico executive order into law. I think we ought to do that with every single one of President Trump's executive orders across the board, but particularly related to immigration.
Congressman, I appreciate your responses, candidness, and thoroughness in being able to address questions without dodging them. Some of your colleagues in Congress, I can't say I share the same respect for them in the fact that they've gotten so good at lying to the American public that they forget that we're elected to represent us, not their friends who are lining their pockets. And this level of transparency is something that I know will be hard to keep. I know the pressure for corruption, the pressure for silence. And as we've seen, people do die and people are silenced. We're not making any accusations, just saying, as Elon Musk said, he was afraid to push on the corruption on his last interview on Joe Rogan because he said, he could get assassinated. And so, our thoughts and prayers are with you and your family. Congratulations on all the wonderful embarkments you guys have had together. But I do have one last thing to ask you. You had some pushback today, some controversy about a suggestion about putting Trump on a $100 bill. Number one, was that real? And what is your actual thoughts on that? And your response to the opposition who says that this is performative action and not something a serious congressman would do? I'm just saying, I thought it was funny, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
This is a real bill, and it's simply a recognition that President Trump has completely shifted the political paradigm in America. And I think that he has reshaped the Republican Party, for instance, in a very positive way. We've talked a lot about immigration. President Trump was on the forefront of putting Americans first when it comes to legal and illegal immigration. But think of other ways. He's been on the forefront of fighting back against censorship, and he was doing it long before explicit censorship was widely understood. President Trump in 2015, for instance, was known for saying things that were out of the bounds of acceptable political discourse. He would say things that were considered politically incorrect. And I think that was a good thing because it opened up the way we discuss politics. Political correctness was simply a social means of censoring Americans, and it had gotten really deeply entrenched across not only the federal government, but all of civil society, and President Trump opened that up. The bill that I have right now is simply a recognition that President Trump has done an enormous amount of good for this country. He is on track to be the most consequential president in modern history, and I think we ought to recognize him for that.
Congressman, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Obviously, I was just talking to a congressman, and not all of us are smart enough to get into Congress. Maybe I'm not myself. And even if you are, you've got to be corrupt too to find out how to invest and turn a $170,000 salary into millions of dollars. But if you're like me and you want to make money and invest, but you see the markets are cooked with crypto and even the stock market isn't doing so good, well, I can tell you, you don't have to be corrupt to still make money in this crazy economy. So listen to me. The world's smartest investors are bypassing oil stocks, and instead they're opting for mailbox money through oil royalties. It's a form of passive income that arrives monthly with an entry point as low as $25. This opportunity accessible with ElijahOil.com. That's ElijahOil.com. It'll allow anyone with standard brokerage account, no wealth or connections required, to tap into monthly royalty checks from America's most productive oil basin. Visit ElijahOil.com to learn how you can start collecting these consistent oil royalty payments today. Check it out, links on the screen and in the description. Once again, thank you so much again for investing in yourself and your future with oil royalties at ElijahOil.com. Learn how to game the system without corruption and having to join Congress in a real way that relies on natural resources. My name is Elijah Schaffer. Thank you so much again for watching another episode of the Gateway Pundits Week in Review. This is a special episode with Congressman Brandon Gill. If you'd like to support the show even further, you can join our mug club, grab one of these amazing mugs, and join our team and support us directly financially in a way that will help bring you independent media, journalism that you can trust in a time where it's needed the most. Plus, the mug is high quality. You can drink your coffee or sip your tea while you get the tea with me every day here at thegatewaypundit.com. Have a great rest of the week, and may God bless the United States of America. I'm signing out.